Okay, we're back.
And we're back. We are live again. Apologize, we had some technical issues before, but we're back. We're ready to go. Again, my name is Joe Kimmock. I am really, really privileged to be here with Brian Morris today. Brian is the third person in our series, Stories That Free Us. We're telling stories of all different people who have been touched by the criminal justice system one way or another. We know that the absolute best way to change hearts and minds is to tell people stories. And so I'm really, really privileged to be here with Brian to be able to help him tell his story. As a teenager and young man, Brian Morris was, by all accounts, what we might describe as a career criminal. As a daily user of hashish and heroin, Brian was enamored by a drug scene and committed a number of drug and property and escape crimes. Eventually, after multiple run-ins with the law, Brian was sentenced to 30 years in prison. He was 17 at the time. While inside, Brian teamed up with his friend Bobby to run the Florida Prison Legal Aid Organization and a newsletter called Florida Prison Legal Perspectives. The newsletter was widely popular and had a higher readership than most local newspapers across the state. Brian collected all of the recently released criminal cases and summarized them in the newsletter, which helped prisoners from across the state to challenge their own convictions. Brian also taught other prisoners how to use the law library and became an extraordinary resource for prisoners in their post-conviction remedies. Brian was released in 2011 after spending over 30 years in prison. He became a paralegal, got married, and now today volunteers with numerous groups like FRRC to help expand the rights of returning citizens. He continues to write and consult with people inside prison on their post-conviction remedies. Brian, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you, and good morning again.
Good morning again. So Brian, tell us a little bit about what it was like growing up for you and what was going on in your life, just before you started or getting in trouble with the law.
Okay, well, as I was saying before we were cut off, I was abandoned when I was a child and by my mother, and my father eventually told me that he wasn't my real father and threatened to put me in a foster home because the love of his life just left him, who was my mother. I ran away and ended up breaking into the house. I got caught breaking in. I was breaking in the house not to steal money. I was trying to steal blankets because I lived in a little fort in Arkansas and it was kind of cold. Plus I was going in there eating all their sweeties bowl of cereal every night. I'd clean up behind myself trying to get it, but I got caught and they contacted my grandfather and I went and lived with him until my mother brought me to Iran, and then I was just real rebellious. So I started using.
From where?
Isfahan, Iran. It's
Okay.
really pronounced. So yeah, I speak Farsi, which is a foreign language of Iranians. Not as good as I used to, but I still speak it. Anyway, I got involved in drugs over there really easy. There was enormous supply. I mean, all you had to do was walk down to the park and tell one of the Iranians you wanted some hash or some heroin, and they would go get it. And the police over there didn't mess with the Americans too much at all. Well, when I came back to the United States, I brought a bunch of that with me in a Vaseline bottle and met a bunch of drug dealers. And next thing you know, I'm moving drugs all over the United States, just mostly marijuana. And then we got into cocaine and crystal meth. And I had a few run-ins with law enforcement. And because I refused to cooperate, they came down on me extra hard. They tried to give me shock probation, but they didn't explain that to me. And I ended up escaping during the 90-day trial period. And when they finally catch me, they didn't prosecute me for the escape just because they felt like.
What was that? What is shock probation?
Okay, shock probation is where they bring you in. Now what Texas is doing is they bring you in, they tell you, okay, we're going to give you this lengthy sentence, 10 years or 20 years. However, in 90 days, if you stay out of trouble and you good, we'll bring you back to court and reconsider the judgment and maybe modify it to withhold adjudication and place you out on probation. Well, at the time that I went to court, which was in 1980, they just started this program, and I was actually in what they called a pilot program. Well, they didn't tell me that in 90 days they were going to bring me back. They just took me into court and told me I'm going to do all this time. And I'm thinking, okay, I'm going to get away. I mean, I was a kid. You take any person and tell them you're going to be in prison 30 years. And here I am thinking I hadn't even been alive 17 years. And so, yeah, my first thought and only thought was 24 hours a day is how can I get away? And first chance I got, I ran. It wasn't really
so you escaped this I guess juvenile shock program. What happened next?
Yes. Okay. I was on the run for like 7 months, but during that 7 months, I turned 18. I'd stolen a car, and I mean, they're going to catch you sooner or later. And when they caught me, they brought me back, and then the judge explained to me, look, that had you not did this, we were going to bring you back and put you out on probation. And it was a little late. Well, I ended up getting a 5-year prison sentence, and I escaped again. I come to Florida from Texas, and broke into some houses and stole another car. And by the time they ended up catching up with me, to make a long story short, I ended up getting 20 years in state of Texas, or 25 years in the state of Texas, 20 years in Florida. And I had federal time, which I was originally given 360 months, which is 30 years on top of all my state time. I had to do state of Texas, then Florida, then the feds. But the United States Supreme Court vacated that in 1993 because the feds had classified me as an armed career criminal, but I'd never used a firearm during the commission of any violent offense. And because of that, the United States Supreme Court said they couldn't classify me as an armed career criminal. So they brought me back and just classified me as a career criminal. But even then, the judge said I never had a chance because I was still a kid, but there was minimum mandatories under the guidelines. They were mandatory, and the minimum he could sentence me to was 188 months. And the Lacey Collier, they called him Lifetime Collier. He's a chief judge in the Northern District of Florida right now. He actually looked at me and said, son, that's still too much time. He said, if I could, I'd send you to the military. But unfortunately, they stopped doing that right before I got in trouble. So he sent me to, he ordered my sentence to run concurrent with my state sentence, which was basically like doing away with my federal sentence almost entirely. I actually had a release date now, and that pretty much ended my desire.
So when you I guess you're in your first year of prison, and you've got all this time ahead of you, what was your kind of outlook back then when you first started all this time?
Okay, well, I still wanted out, but I knew after I got caught trying to escape, and I actually escaped twice, and then on the third time I attempted to escape. That was from Fort Walton Beach, Florida, Okaloosa County Jail in Crestview, Florida. I attempted to escape. They gave me 15 years just for the attempt. Well, they put me in maximum security and high custody, closed custody inmates, so I was under constant surveillance. So I knew my chances of escaping were slim to none. So I started studying law. I said, well, I got to figure out a way to get out of here. So I started going to the prison law library every chance I got. And I had a big motivator. I didn't want to do all that time. And then I started helping other inmates who, like me, had a lot of time. Some of these guys that I met in prison, I would never think they'd ever even be in prison, first off, much less doing all the time. And then I started thinking, I said, well, I've never hurt nobody. I'm a pretty good guy. Why am I doing all this time? Well, because we got mandatory minimum sentences. There's a lot of people in prison right now that really don't belong there. I know I spent 30 years in there.
Talk to me about your work with the newsletter and the legal aid organization. What was that? What was that all about?
Okay, FPLP, the Florida Prison Legal Perspectives newsletter. That was a friend of mine, Bobby Posey, actually started that in 1994 as just a little 4-page staple together. And then he got transferred to Columbia Correctional Institution, where I was the senior law clerk, and he gets a job in the law library, and we get to talking. And I said, man, you call this a legal perspective, but you don't even talk about any of the cases that's coming out that would help these guys. So I started doing a section called Notable Cases, where I would write articles about all the cases. We would try to focus on cases that we thought would have the biggest impact because we were limited on the number of pages that we had. And I would focus on cases that I thought would have the biggest impact of helping the larger majority of inmates. And we started getting so much feedback from it. Just in a matter of a couple of months, we went from like 2,500 subscribers to 3,500 subscribers, and it was steadily building because people were finding that there was good information in it, that it was helping them either get their sentences overturned. Like back in 1995, they had the Higgs decision. It actually didn't come out till 99, I believe, where they ruled the sentencing guidelines unconstitutional in Florida. And that impacted like 5,000 prisoners had to be resentenced. And a lot of these attorneys were charging these guys $5,000-$10,000. Well, these guys their families didn't have that kind of money. And so I did a sample motion of what a Higgs motion would look like in our newsletter. And it's, in fact, they got it in every prison law library to this day, to the best of my knowledge. That's what I've been told. Because guys couldn't afford to hire the attorneys, but they still were entitled to relief. So I provided this form, and I actually have been working on cases now where I'll pull the guy's case file and I'll see where he did the motion that I actually prepared in that newsletter. It's kind of neat. It's a good thing that I helped out so many people.
How did you actually distribute the newsletter? Like how did it actually get to other prisoners?
Okay, well, after I got involved in it, we applied for our 501c3 status, and we became a nonprofit organization. And then we applied for a reduced postage because I was paying for this newsletter pretty much out of pocket, other than the subscriptions. But we were only charging like $6 for a year's subscription, which was really nothing. And then we'd put the newsletter together and send it out to Teresa, and she would do all the layout and have it printed up by the publishing company and mail it to the inmates. So as having an attorney on our board of directors opened the door for us to classify ourselves as a legal aid organization. And even though we're not supposed to communicate with prisoners at another institution, we were able to circumvent that rule by classifying our organization as a legal aid organization. I would send Teresa, and inmates from all over Florida would be sending information about what's happening at their prison, and she would send it to us, and it'd come in as legal mail. So we're able, we'd have to read all this, and some of these guys, everything was handwritten, so it was a lot of work.
Were you able to help real people? In fact, I know the answer to this. You were in fact able to help real people get their either convictions overturned or sentences reduced or eliminated. Is that correct?
Yes, I've actually assisted well over 100 people, including myself, walk out of prison early because of post-conviction remedies, which are very strict.
And how does that, how did that make you feel? When you're able to help somebody else get their sentence reduced or walk out early?
I think everybody thrives on accomplishments. I do. And every time, I had a law library supervisor actually tell me one time, "You must have just walked somebody out." And I said, "Why do you say that?" He said, "Because you're glowing." He said, "You're actually glowing." And it was a great feeling knowing that you united somebody with their family, especially when you get to know these guys. They got families out there, they got kids, and they're saying, "Man, my kid's growing up." And I had a lot of guys that are out there hitting the weight pile, building them muscles up, and then they come talk to me in my cell and they'd break down crying, "Man, I miss my babies." And it was pretty touching. And it was really a good feeling every time you know that you help somebody get out, that, especially when they didn't belong there. I'm not saying that a lot of the guys in there, they needed to be prosecuted, but they definitely didn't need the amount of time that they received.
I was going to ask you that. Do you, you have, when you were a teenager, by your own admission, you were committing all kinds of different crimes, burglaries. I guess let's say that today or tomorrow you were appointed a circuit court judge by the governor of Florida, and you're a criminal judge, and a kid walks into your courtroom with the same offenses that you walked into a courtroom with, 40 years ago. What would you say to that kid? What do you think the appropriate, outcome for that kid would be?
okay, well, you can't just give them a slap on the hand. I mean, I was on a rampage. I was committing a lot of crimes. I was breaking into houses, I was stealing things that weren't mine. And I needed to be punished. I didn't need to be locked up for 30 years. After my first year in jail, I thought, okay, I'm never doing this again. And then after the 5th year, you're thinking, this is just, what am I doing? I'm just wasting my life away. I'm just going to sit here and rot in prison. Well, the taxpayers are paying for it, 60 grand a year, a lot more than that when you get older and you have medical conditions. I would probably tell that person, look, you're throwing your life away. I do believe that he would need to be penalized. I mean, he can't, I wouldn't just let him go, but I wouldn't lock him up for life either. Maybe, okay, I'm going to put you in jail for a year, but you're definitely going to stay in jail for a full year. And then you're going to be on some intensive supervision. I really don't have an answer to that. I mean, I can sympathize with the victims of crimes, but when you lock up a person for life, you're destroying a lot of families too. Mm-hmm. And there's really no simple solution. I do not agree with the minimum mandatories. I think the sentencing guidelines, they may have had really good intent, uniformity in sentencing, because guys in North Florida were getting really harsh sentences, while guys in South Florida for the same offenses were getting lesser sentences. So they wanted to create some type of uniformity in sentencing, which was fine. But when you remove the discretion from the courts, you're dehumanizing it. Yeah. If you bring the human factor back into it and you say, okay, well, this guy, yeah, he did go out and commit all these crimes, but look at what his accomplishments were before.
Well, and we know now from data that the creation of those minimum mandatories did not even remotely do what it was intended to do. So there are still dramatic disparities among the different circuits. They're just prosecutor based, not judge based. So because because almost everything is resolved through plea bargains, you know, it's still very much up to the prosecutor that you end up getting that ends up determining folks' sentence. And so disparities have not been eliminated.
Right. The prosecutor has a discretion on how to charge you. He can charge you with an offense that will require a mandatory sentence, or he can charge you with an offense that doesn't require that mandatory sentence. And really, that they had all the discretion. And of course, the prosecutor's office, it seemed like they were always wanting the max, because that opened the door for them to plea bargain. They said, okay, we're going to charge you with this offense way up here, even though we know you're only guilty of this. Mm-hmm. But if you enter a plea, then we'll reduce it down to what you really should be convicted of anyway. Mm-hmm. And that happens. I guess that's just standard practice. Yeah. That's and then it's unfortunate, because a lot of guys, they don't realize that. And then a lot of times they'll have an attorney appointed that this attorney has 50 other cases going at a time. They don't have time to humanize it. They don't have time to get to know their client and to really process all the facts of the case. And they just, okay, well, this is what the state's offering. They got a pretty good case against you, so you better take it, or you're going to be facing this.
Right.
So yeah, most convictions result in a plea bargain. Or plea bargain.
So you end up being in there for a little over 31 years. You're actually, because you had committed crimes in a number in both Texas and Florida, you spent time in Texas State Prison, you spend time in Florida State Prison, and you spend time, a little bit of time in a federal prison.
Right, in the U.S. And they sent me to the worst too. I went to USP Pollock just because I had escapes, which was the maximum. Mm-hmm. That's above Leavenworth and Leavenworth and Atlanta are what's called federal correctional institutions. The United States Penitentiary. Actually, Gene Gotti was my next door neighbor. That's John Gotti's little brother.
Eventually, what you walk out in 2011, a free man. You are in your 40s. You know, you spent your entire 20s, entire 30s in prison. You're now in your late 40s. You obviously, the world has advanced 30 years while you were inside. Tell me a little bit about what that was like.
Okay, well, before I get out, everybody's telling me, look, don't do anything because everything's on camera now. Well, the BOP of the guards, they take me down to a bus station. They're sending me to a federal halfway house. Before you get released from the feds, they send you to a halfway house for the last 4 to 6 months before you're released. I went there for 4 months because I was from the United States Penitentiary. You had to be from a lower institution to get 6 months. Now that's changed. Now they're trying to get everybody a year, which you really do need a year in a halfway house. Well, I get the BOP officials dropped me off at a bus station. I just left the most violent prison in the United States. What the Department of Justice said, Pollock USP at that time was the most violent prisoner on prisoner prison in the United States. And when they dropped me off, the guards dropped me off at the bus station. First, they said, you just did 30 calendar. They stopped at McDonald's, bought me a Happy Meal. And I'm thinking, okay, well, I'm going to go easy. And I couldn't believe when they told me it was $20. Man, I'm thinking $5 worth of food. And, I just ordered a Big Mac and apple pie and a shake or something. But then they dropped me off at the bus station and they tell me it's a violent neighborhood. So I'm thinking, well, I just left the most violent prison. He said, well, the difference is out here, these guys got guns. So I go hang out in the bus station and I go in to use the restroom and everybody's been telling me everything's on camera. Well, I go over and I use the toilet and I'm looking to flush it. And how do you flush it? I said, well, so I just turn around and walk off and it automatically flushed. I'm thinking, man, they got cameras in the bathroom. Well, it took me a while. I'm sitting there trying to figure this. I just did 30 years in prison. I'd never seen a toilet that automatically flushed. So I'm sitting there tripping on this. And I finally seen the little red light and I'm thinking it was sensors on the floor. So I'm stomping all around the floor. And finally I seen the red light and I waved my hand on it and it flushed. And I said, okay. Well, then I go over to the sink and I'm trying, how do you turn this thing on? And sure enough, it had one of the red lights on it too. So you just put your hand on. I went over to the door and stood there for a minute, but I had to open it myself. Darn it. Then I get on the bus and it's getting dark. And this person's sitting kind of catty corner to me, just talking away like he's carrying on a conversation. I said, man, this guy's out there. He's crazy. He's carrying on a conversation with himself. And I look in front of me, another person is doing the same thing. I said, man, they got me on a bus full of Looney Tunes or something. Well, we pull up at the next bus stop and they let us off. Everybody wants to smoke, so you can get off and smoke. And I see all these people with these little things in their ear, the little Bluetooth speakers. I'd never seen that before. But and they're just carrying on a conversation with somebody. I said, okay, I guess they're really talking to somebody. But yeah, it was an experience getting out. But the biggest shock was just going in groceries like Walmart. They didn't have Walmart superstores when I went in. I couldn't believe how big these stores were. I wanted to see everything. But at the same time, I'm intimidated by everything. I really didn't want to go anywhere. I want to just stay pretty much in the halfway out as much as possible because it was a change. It was something that I wasn't familiar with. And that took a while for me to get used to. I was pretty blessed in the fact that I developed a lot of good skills and abilities while I was incarcerated in the law library. I didn't have to go out looking for a job. Actually, I had an attorney hunting me down. He'd been following me through the newsletter for years, and he actually came to the halfway house, tried to hire me right there. And I'm like, okay, this is pretty convenient. Well, but he was stationed in Orlando, and the halfway house was in Pensacola. So to get out of the halfway house, you had to be going to apply for a job or something. So I went with a bunch of guys down to a fish market to apply for a job, knowing I didn't want to work at this fish market. Well, I get down there and I fill out the application and sit on the bench, and this guy comes by and points at me, tells me, come on in his office. It was Joe Patty's Seafood Market. That's the #2 tourist attraction in Pensacola, Florida. He takes me in his office and says, so why do you want to work at my seafood market? And I said, sir, no disrespect. I don't mean to take up any of your time, but I'm not interested in the job. What'd you fill out the application for? I said, actually, he said, I know you just wanted to get out of the halfway house. And I said, yes, sir, that's the truth. He said, so what are you planning on doing? And so I started telling him about myself. And he said, you just did 30 years in prison. I said, yes, sir. And he says, I've got to introduce you to my daughter. And I'm like, I just told this guy I did 30 years in prison. He's wanting to introduce me to his daughter. His daughter was an attorney. I didn't know that. Mary Ann Patty. Well, anyway, so I call her up and she tells me she wants to interview me. So I go down and interview her, and She tells me right off the bat, she said, look, before I started talking to you, I'll tell you, I had no intentions of hiring a convicted felon. She said, but you're the real deal, because I answered a few questions, and it's just, and she turns around and punches it up on Westlaw, and I was right on the, she said, you're the real deal. So I ended up she hired me on 1099 basis until I finished the halfway house, and I moved to Orlando with Gray Proctor. But so I pretty much never had to go out looking for a job, which was a blessing for me, because I know a lot of these guys were struggling with that because they didn't have a lot of resume or application, anything.
And you've been out 10 years now, right? You've gotten married. Congratulations.
Thank you.
When I know you work with a lot of guys that come out even now, what is it that you think is the most difficult things for folks that are coming out now, and what do the rest of us who have never been inside, need to understand about folks that are coming out now?
Okay, well, it's okay when a person comes out, there's so many challenges. They've got so many obstacles. I mean, if you look at the American Bar Association's website on collateral consequences of a criminal conviction, the state of Florida has over 107 pages of collateral consequences to a criminal conviction alone. I mean, there's so many of them that half of them aren't even enforced because people aren't aware of it. But the reality is, you can't go find a place to live because they ask, have you ever been convicted of a felony? It's hard to find a job. You can't even get a job flipping burgers at McDonald's because they ask, have you ever been convicted of a felony? And if you say yes, they won't hire you. Those are just small examples. My biggest thing, when I walked out, I still had probation, parole, for 1 year after my release. And I go to the probation department, and the first thing my probation officer tells me is I have to pay $54 a year. I mean, $54 a month. And I'm thinking, okay, well, I could do that because I already had a job. But what about these? Now, that's what the first 72 hours after you get out, and I had money. I didn't even have a job then, but I'm thinking, okay, well, I can afford that. But what about these guys that can't? And then this probation officer tells me, and if you don't pay your $54, I'm going to file an affidavit of violation. Well, for the average guy, he doesn't realize it's not a willful violation. If he doesn't have the ability to pay, they can't send him back to prison. So he's sitting there thinking, okay, I've got to go out there and get up $54 to give this probation officer. I'm going back to prison. And I don't even have I don't know where I'm going to get my food yet. I don't know where I'm going to live. So yeah, that can be pretty intimidating. And it's like an encouragement to go out there and commit a crime for guys that don't know that if they don't have the ability to pay, they can't send you back to prison for the inability to pay. It's just you refuse to pay, even though you are able to.
Right.
But that's just a little loophole in the law that a lot of guys are not familiar with. But it can be intimidating when you walk out and you're told that you got to make these supervision payments. What I'd like to see Florida do is have expedited food stamps too, because we did it. We got it started in Pennsylvania, where before a guy gets released, the classification department would actually process their paperwork for the food stamps, so that when they got out, they would actually have the card waiting for them. I got out, I had to struggle. Now, sure, I'm in a halfway house and they provide you, but what about these guys that they get immediate release and they don't get to go to halfway houses? They're stuck. What I do now is I have like a lot of pool parties over here. We'll have little cookouts. We'll get the grill out. And I have a bunch of returning citizens, AKA ex-cons, come over. And I try to encourage them to not do anything out of desperation. Make sure they got food, and let them know, okay, I got friends that are also returning citizens now. They've worked their way into supervisory positions. And even though it might be landscaping or something, it's employment, and they'll hire returning citizens because they know they've been there.
Right.
And they want to give guys a chance.
Well, what you have done kind of with your life over the last 10 years really is inspiring, Brian. I mean, it is hard enough for folks, for anybody coming out of prison to, get their life in order with all the challenges that you just talked about. It's even harder when you've literally spent every moment of your adult life in prison and all of a sudden you're kicked out at 47 or 48 or however old you are.
50,
but
right?
to not only be able to do that, but to kind of use your your privilege and your abilities to help the other folks that are coming out is really, it's inspiring to me, and I thank you very, very much for being a part of this conversation.
Okay.
If anybody wants to get in contact with you, they want to, either they're a returning citizen and need some help or whatever, how can they contact you?
They can reach me at brian@prisonerconsultant.com, or you can visit my website, prisonperspectives.com. That's
Okay.
Brian at prisoner, not prison, but prisonerconsultant.com. I live in Coral Springs, Florida. You can find me all over social media as the paralegal that rides. But to be honest, a lot of this, when I try to encourage these other guys to do the right thing, a lot of that, I might be greedy. I think that helps me more than them. By me staying on them about doing the right thing, I have to set an example. So yeah, I might be a little greedy there. I mean, I really do want to help other people, but I realize that I'm really the one that benefits from it. The more I try to encourage these guys to do the right things. I think we just.
You're still here. We can hear you.
Okay. But yeah, like helping others helps yourselves. There's an old saying, and I think there's a lot of truth to that.
Well,
so yeah,
I thank you very much again for this conversation. For anybody who's listening, if you could please share this video. The more folks that we get to hear Brian's story, the better. Brian's story is really, really a testament to our sentencing laws and how much reform needs to be made with our sentencing laws, and frankly, how much power a prosecutor has in determining, the outcome of somebody's life. You can also check out our campaign at www.joekimok.com. It's JOEKIMOK.com. Brian, have a good rest of your day, and everyone else that's watching, have a great rest of your day.
Okay, I do want to say one thing though. I really wish you the best of luck in your campaign, because I really think that you're our best chance of actually humanizing the state attorney's office. That would be a first. And yeah, I do think you're the best candidate for the job. So good luck with your candidacy.
Well, thank you so much for saying that. I really, really appreciate your support, Brian.
Thank you.
And you're going to get to vote, right?
I sure am. Thanks to the Florida Rights Coalition. I'm also active.
Great.
Florida Cares. Florida Cares is another great organization, together with the Human Rights Outlook Center, which is my own organization. And we're starting a newsletter back up.
Good. All right. Y'all have a good rest of your day.
You too. Thank you very much.